Hey y'all, Ryan here. This is a video we've been meaning to make for a long time. I promise there won't be too many procrastination puns as we go through it, but we'll see what happens. But this is, everyone struggles or deals with procrastination in some way. And this is a presentation that I've given in classes before and other places. So definitely wanted to get this out there and put it on the YouTube channel. So looking forward to talking with you about procrastination. As we get started, let's check in with what we know about procrastination. In a November 2020 article for The Conversation, Shi and Chang review the scholarship on academic procrastination. And you can see that they claim that more than 70% of college students procrastinate, with 20% consistently doing it all the time. And the source that quote comes from is from this article from 2007 in the Journal of Educational Psychology. Schra, Watkins, and Olafson, explore academic procrastination with college students. And it's an interesting study, fascinating in a lot of ways. And they identify 6 principles of academic procrastination, but they do draw some conclusions. And one of the things that they say is that their findings support several claims from previous research. They don't necessarily line up with other claims from previous research, and they generated some new possibilities. And so I think one of the things that's helpful to know is that while there's lots of ways to understand the phenomena of procrastination and people continue to study it, we're still learning about it. In fact, the first checkpoint in this video gets to that idea of learning. So Dr. Linda Sapaden is the author of Beat Procrastination and Make the Grade, the 6 styles of procrastination and how students can overcome them. I had the opportunity to hear Dr. Sapaden speak at a conference all the way back in, I think it was 2002, so a while ago. But it was really helpful at this conference to begin the discussion for those few days around things that get in the way of meeting expectations. Dr. Sapaden is a clinical psychologist in New York. She was a lecturer, consultant, and column writer. And she's written a bunch of things, including the book I have right here is my copy that I was able to get. I think the main thing is it comes from her work, primarily working with Fortune 500, Wall Street, financial industry types, and their struggles to overcome procrastination to reach the goals and things that they set for themselves. And as she was coming to understand from her practice working with her clients, the many shapes and styles and approaches to procrastination, somebody had mentioned to her, this would work great with students. And so I was at a conference in San Antonio, and she was the opening keynote speaker, where we were trying to figure out how we can help students make the transition from high school to college. And procrastination was the starting thing. And part of the book is an assessment, a procrastination styles survey that you can take to find out. So in the link or the link to those documents are in the description below. So you can take the assessment. And that's what we're going to ask you to do, is to sort of treat this video like a workshop where you can find out which of the 6 procrastination styles are major or minor styles for you. So what we want you to do is to take the assessment, these quizzes first. You can follow the directions. You can download them in the PDF, print them off if you want to, or you can do them by hand, however. But you're going to answer whether or not you do those things frequently, sometimes, rarely, never. And then you'll get a subtotal for the frequently times 2, the sometimes, and then you'll add that up, and that'll be the subtotal for each of the styles. And as we mentioned, there are 6 styles, so there are 6 quizzes. And I want you to go through and take each one of them and do your best to answer as honestly and truthfully as you can. And then at the very end, there's this sort of table where you can find out your major and your minor styles, and then you can rank them. You'll notice that I whited out the names. I don't want anyone to be influenced by the name of the styles. Some of them sound better than others. I mean, probably you've taken enough of these assessments where you can kind of already see where they're leading, but some of these procrastination styles sound better than others, and we don't want you to be like, oh, that's the kind of procrastinator I want to be. So I'm going to ask that when you take the assessment that you stop the video here and don't watch any further. Take your time, take the assessments, get your totals, and then come back here and find out which of the 6 procrastination styles are yours, because that's just the best way to do this. Normally we do these sessions like in a classroom or whatever, where it's live, and so people take the assessment, we give everybody time to do that, and then you find out what are your styles. So I would ask that you honor that and stop here, pause the video. I'm not going anywhere. Take the assessment and then come back and find out which of the styles are your major and minor styles. So push pause and then come back, and we'll do the results, and you'll find out what are your styles. I'll wait. Seriously, you can push pause. It's all good. Okay. So hopefully you've taken the styles assessment. You've got your subtotals. You know which of them are your major or minor as far as the number. And when I advance the slide, you're going to find out which are the styles that you have as majors and minors. So the first style is the perfectionist. Like I said, some of them sound better than others. Second is the dreamer. Third is the worrier. Fourth is the crisis-maker. Fifth is the defier. And sixth is the overdoer. And so you can write in on your assessments which of those, or you can write in the names of them so you can know what they are. But like I said, some of them sound better than others. Certainly everybody wants to use the first one when they talk about their weaknesses, but now we get to find out if you really are a perfectionist or not. What we're going to do in this session is I've also provided links to these worksheets. They're sort of fill in the blank worksheets that as we go through the presentation, you can write them down. And it's not just that we want you to find out what kind of procrastinator you are. It's that we also want you to get some useful things to know about yourself and some things that you can do to change and to beat procrastination. That's the purpose of Dr. Sapaden's book. And ultimately, that's the purpose of any kind of assessment, personality-wise or otherwise, is to learn more about yourself and then use that information to reach the goals that you've set for yourself. Those can be academic goals, career goals, personal goals, but you can use this information beyond just, well, I took a test and it told me I was a worrier or whatever, but like, let's find out what to actually do about that and how to overcome your procrastination styles and be more effective in life. So we're going to go through each of the styles in order, and we'll start with the perfectionist. Dr. Sapaden in her book organizes the chapters around sort of an overview description of what it means to be this type of procrastinator, and then gives you things to do in the way that you think, the way that you speak, and then in your actions. And so you'll see those on the worksheets, and that's the structure that will go through these. If you are not one of these styles, if it's not one of your major or minor styles, we'll put the sort of chapter times down in the description below, and you can skip ahead so that you don't have to listen to all of these. We want to make this as helpful as possible. So use the worksheets as you go through them to learn about your style and to how to help your thinking, your speaking, and your actions. And then check back in with us at the end of it to talk a little bit more about procrastination once you get to your styles. So perfectionists tend to be idealists, and they have unrealistic expectations about their use of time and energy. They're likely to view almost everything as a burden because they expect it to be perfect, and that makes it difficult to perform individual tasks efficiently. Perfectionists also fear failing, and so they're inclined to postpone starting or completing tasks because if it's not going to work out exactly right, then why even do it? You don't want to mess it up. Perfectionist was my second major style when I took this assessment way back when. And definitely, I really do like the idea of precision, of doing it exactly the best way it possibly can. I think I've more than one occasion I said something like, well, it's not just do something, let's do the right thing. And so you can spend time chasing the right thing instead of doing something. So like I said, Dr. Sapaden has some recommendations for what to do about the way we think, because the way we think and our worldview so often drives our actions, and our actions drive our results. That's the see, do, get model from Franklin Covey. And so you're going to have in every one of these procrastination styles some recommendations for thinking. And one of the things that she recommends for everybody is this creative visualization exercise, where for perfectionists, it's about being spontaneous and imaginative, just visualizing what would life be like if you weren't always so precise and calculating, and if you're a little bit more open-ended and not trying to get perfection all the time. She recommends that you appreciate that the perfectionist procrastination is something you're choosing as an expectation. It's your problem. It's not anyone else's expectation. I think if you ask people in your life, do you expect me to be perfect? Their answer, of course, would be no. Maybe they expect you to be your best, or to make your best effort, but that perfect isn't anyone else's expectation. It's just yours. And before you begin a class assignment, you should put some thought into what is practical and realistic instead of what would or might be an ideal way to do the assignment. We don't always have to do things ideally or perfectly or the best way they possibly could be done. Be sure to allow yourself more than adequate time to accomplish tasks. Some folks, will be like, I can get this done in an hour. You might take more as a perfectionist because you're going to chase little details here and there. And you should make it your goal to work steadily toward improvement if that's something that's needed, sharpening your skills or recovering from setbacks instead of always expecting an A, right? If you didn't make an A on the first test, the next one doesn't have to be an A. Maybe you just want to make an improvement to a B, and be a little bit more realistic with expectations on improving things. Also, it helps to regularly remind yourself that you have the ability to be accomplished, right? It doesn't have to be perfect all the time, but it can go toward something that looks like your long-term goal. And you have that capacity. You are able to do those things. And just get that reminder, because a lot of times it comes from feelings like it's not where it needs to be. And just remind yourself that you can get there. You may not be there right now, but you can. Just because it isn't doesn't mean it will never be. As it relates to speaking, Dr. Sapaden recommends that you avoid using extreme language, especially when it aggravates your anxiety and stress. And this is something that will come across in other styles too, that when we speak in exaggerated, sort of hyperbolic language, that we tend to push ourselves to extremes, and that doesn't help anybody relax and think. Also, she recommends that we avoid the tyranny of shoulds by turning it should be like this or whatever into more flexible. It could. You could do it that way, or you could do it another way. It doesn't have to be that way. Also, turning musts into choose to, like instead of this is the way it must be done, you say this is the way I choose to do it, and develop a little bit more agency and ownership. Every time you hear yourself say, I have to, try to rephrase that into a statement that's more positive and says more like, no, what I want is. And as a result, as it relates to your actions, it helps to make a to-do list each day that's short and practical. You're not going to do everything all in one day. The cliche is what Rome wasn't built in a day. If you want something really great to happen, you're going to have to take time and make sure that you give yourself an opportunity to do it, but not try to do too much all at once. Also, it helps if you assign a time limit for completing tasks, right? If you just give yourself an open-ended amount of time to read, or to write a paper, or to work on a project, or to do research, then your perfectionist tendencies will be to chase the perfect as opposed to get something done. So having a time limit helps rein in that perfectionist tendencies. If you have trouble completing assignments on time, ask your instructors or a well-organized classmate to help. Like What would you recommend? How do you get these things done? Asking for advice can help you realize that you can still do it, even if it's not in a perfect way. And when you're working on a project with other students, I know group assignments are tough, but you gotta let each person do their fair share, and work in their own way, because if you try to do everything perfectly and control it, then you're going to end up doing most of the work, which I don't think anyone wants. Maybe what you shoot for is being a perfect delegator. Let people do the things that they need to do and handle that well, as opposed to trying to do the whole project yourself. This seems sort of silly, but sometimes we have a tendency to want everything to go exactly right, and being okay when they don't, whether it's making a deliberate mistake or not, is something like making peace with. Every once in a while things don't go exactly right, and that's okay. But it's also helpful to remember that as you go through your student years, that the goal is probably something else, right? Not perfection, but the sense of being and getting fulfillment and satisfaction from being a college student, not just the things that you do. So perfectionists, like I said, a lot of people want to say when they're asked about their weaknesses, that they're a perfectionist. My recommendation is that if this was one of your major or minor styles, I still wouldn't refer to yourself as a perfectionist. I would use the language that you find here in the worksheet in this presentation, or even if you read Dr. Sapaden's book, use that language. Say that sometimes you can be unrealistic about expectations. Sometimes you try to chase doing it exactly the best you possibly can, as opposed to deciding on what just needs to get done. I would not recommend saying that you're a perfectionist, especially if you're not. But even if you are a perfectionist based on this assessment, I would use the language that describes what it looks like to be a perfectionist, and not use the label, because a lot of people, when asked about their weaknesses, are going to say that they're perfectionists, and we hear that all the time. So I would use the language instead to describe what it means, and how, of course, how you overcome it. And you have some recommendations here. So the next procrastination style is the Dreamer. I'm not a big fan of the illustration here, mainly because Dreamer is my top procrastination style. So I don't like the airhead sort of ditzy look that they went with on this illustration, but a lot of it does ring true for me. And if it's in your one of your top styles, one of your major styles of procrastination, maybe it'll sound like you as well. Dreamers spend so much of our lives involved in mental fantasies, imagining what could be. We tend to be more passive than active. We tend to resist paying attention to facts and details, so it can be difficult to finish things because we're thinking more about the big picture. I tend to long for life to always be easy and enjoyable. So if there's something out there that might be hard or difficult, upsetting or uncomfortable, we avoid those things. We resist even thinking about them, because we don't like the way that they feel. And we tend to see ourselves as special, someone that will eventually somehow receive special treatment. Maybe it's because of all the great ideas we have, or the way that we think about the world. So sometimes we think we don't have to work as hard or efficiently, that maybe we've been in the past rewarded for having a big picture idea, and being creative, or whatever it might be. So what's interesting is the interplay between my top two styles is a Dreamer and Procrastinator. Is I tend to spend a lot of time imagining things being exactly perfect, which doesn't get any work done. Eventually, Dreamers have to move on to the work. So Dr. Sapaden recommends that Dreamers practice very limited creative visualization, but specifically where it's about the work getting done, what actions are needed, what steps do you have to take, sort of operationalizing the dream, putting it into action, and visualizing what it looks like to actually do that. Not the end result, but the doing of the steps to get to the end result. She recommends that each semester Dreamers take one of those dreams and transform them into an actual goal. And goals have specifics, right? Measurables, actionables. They're realistic, but they have a timeline. If you're familiar with the SMART, SMART goal, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely. So, don't just think about something you'd like to do. Write it down, get specific, work on the actionables. When you don't want to work on something for school because it doesn't feel good, Try to think instead about how good it'll feel once you have done it, right? The accomplishment, the release of stress or worry or whatever, or the ending of those negative feelings because you've done it. Also, try to not think about yourself as being special compared to other people, and therefore not needing to do what they need to do. Sometimes the strategies of others will work really well for you. They just maybe don't come naturally because your mind is elsewhere. And she recommends that when you get an assignment, immediately develop that assignment by thinking in terms of the 5 W's and the 1 H. What are my desired results? When will I work on those goals? Where can I go for information? Who can help me? Why do I want to do this in the first place? And then how? What are the actual steps? That's a good idea for anybody, regardless of procrastination style or not procrastination. This is a way to think through stuff. And definitely as it relates to being pre-health, since you have long-term, big picture kinds of goals of getting to professional school, walking through the 5 W's and the 1 H can be a great way to think through that. So especially the why. Why do you want to do this is a big part of it. But this helps make things less vague for dreamer procrastinators and makes them more actionable. As it relates to speaking, she recommends that you transform that vague and passive language into concrete, active language. What specifically are you going to do and when? Commit yourself more constructively to those tasks by turning in the wishes, like I just wish it would go away, or wish I didn't have to do this, or wish I was already done, into try to and will. I will try to read that chapter today. I will work on that paper this afternoon. Getting more specific and less passive. Minimize vagueness in your speech by turning someday into soon or into specific times. Anytime you're talking about, eventually I will. It's like anytime you hear that sort of passiveness, that vagueness, turn it into specifics. Also, as best you can, try not to engage in make-believe talk where you imagine fictional scenarios, because that just feeds into that passivity and the fantasy element of being a dreamer procrastinator. Is the more you imagine fictional make-believe stuff, the less likely your life will be actually lived in real life. For actions, before each major assignment, write a plan stating how you'll do it and put a timeline in there. It seems unnecessary. I know we've done a lot of assignments in school, but if you're really struggling with a class or procrastinating in general, having a specific written plan and then keeping up with it is a great personal responsibility action for dreamer procrastinators to take. Use a big, easily seen calendar to keep track of your day-to-day academic and social responsibilities and refer to it daily. I'm going to turn my camera here so you can see in my office. I have a big planning board that I use that helps me keep things, my thinking organized, because if I didn't have it visually in front of me every day, it's really easy for those things to just become ideas again. But these are projects that we started, and I don't want to lose track of them. Every day, she recommends that you create 2 lists of tasks, a to-do and a plan to do. David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, recommended that people create a folder that's called Someday Maybe. And that really works well for me because I love ideas. And anytime I have a new idea, I'm like, I have to decide, is this something to work on right now? And if I have a place to put those ideas so I won't feel like I'll lose track of them, then I can move on. I can let them go a little bit more effectively. So having those 2 places of the things that I'm actually working on and the things that I want to eventually get to a plan to do is a great way to do it. Every week, assign yourself at least 1 special task, 1 to do, something that contributes to those long range goals in addition to your ordinary responsibilities. I think dreamers tend to chase the interesting and fun and enjoyable things. And if we feel like we're not going to get one of them, then we are even more drawn to them. And that's where procrastination for dreamers come from, is chasing the enjoyable stuff. And so you got to make sure that you're planning for those long range, big picture, enjoyable tasks in addition to your day-to-day things. Try to find ways to remind yourself to get going, especially if it's a sticky note or an alarm on your phone, or having a friend check in with you and just tell them, hey, tomorrow, can you ask me about this? Don't wait until you feel like it, or until the spirit moves you, as she puts it. Be cautious of falling into these passive activities of watching things online or reading or whatever. Try to get involved in active things to sort of break that cycle. It's not that, watching shows or reading or whatever in passive activities aren't good. Just make sure they're in the right place. Dreamer procrastinators tend to gravitate to something that's fantasy based and passive. And avoid being a loner. All right. Have interaction with other people. It's really easy when you spend time in your head to forget about the real world. But the more you connect with other people, the interactions you have with them, the accountability that you can build through real life interactions can be really helpful for dreamer procrastinators. Hopefully there's some helpful things for the dreamer procrastinators out there. Let's move on to the next one. The Worrier Procrastinator reminds me of my grandmother on my dad's side, my dad's mom. Every birthday, every Christmas, every gift she gave us came with the disclaimer that if you don't like it, I kept the receipt, you can always return it. Worriers prefer the safety of the known as opposed to the risk of the unknown, and they can be highly resistant to change. Because they're worried about making mistakes, they avoid delay or prolong doing things. So that is where a lot of their procrastination comes from, is because they don't want to mess it up. And apart from being indecisive in general, worriers fail to commit themselves to even specific decisions they make. They sort of have their own disclaimers, like, well, if you don't like it, then you can always take it back. Well, if this doesn't work out, then maybe it was because I wasn't supposed to have done it that way. And worriers tend to seek an exorbitant amount of advice and support and help from other people, which it's good to have a support network. I'm not saying, don't. I'm not saying isolate yourself. But, if you spend more time talking about people's perspectives and opinions and suggestions than actually doing something, then that might be part of the problem. So for worriers, Dr. Sapaden recommends that you perform creative visualization where you imagine yourself being decisive and action oriented and actually tackling the things that scare you the most by imagining what it would be like to actually do those things that you're most concerned about. When a worrier puts off making decisions, they need to recognize that they're actually making a decision to not do anything. And if you're going to take on one of those big challenges, it's okay to say that it makes you nervous, but focus on what could be exciting about it and the opportunities it can bring. Think about the positive. Imagine it working out. Guard against mentally catastrophizing things or making them bigger and more threatening than they are. Life's hard enough as it is. If we build it up to be even worse, it can be a challenge. Also, be your own best friend by believing in your skills, your intelligence, your intuition. Rely on those things, your strengths, even when you're not sure of it yourself. But you've got to, have that positive self-talk. There's a John Green video, if you're familiar with Vlogbrothers, where he talks about his self-talk and how mortifying it is. But he records videos weekly, and you can find them here on YouTube. And he has one of those videos where he has himself, encouraging himself. Stuart Smalley is a Saturday Night Live character that you might have to also find online, where he says he's good enough and smart enough, and doggone it, people like him. You can do that too. You can support yourself in the way that you think about who you are. And also follow this two-part process that Dr. Sapaden recommends if you have a big decision. First, commit to it. Commit to the decision. Then figure out how you're going to do it. Where worriers get sort of bogged down in thinking about things is they imagine all the ways it can go wrong, because they're like, well, I could do this, but that might not go right. Or I could do this, or that might not work out. Or that person might be upset or disappointed. And you just got to say, I'm going to do this, and then we'll figure out how. As it relates to speaking, avoid the use of qualifiers or disclaimers, as I said, because they tend to increase your indecisiveness and procrastination. Just replace the I can't statements, which weaken your resolve, with the I can't do that, but I can do this statement. Like, so I can't decide right now, but while I am deciding, I'm going to do this. Instead of just asking the rhetorical what if. Hope you're enjoying that series, by the way. Instead of asking what if this happened, what if that person was mad, what if it didn't work out, which make you more apprehensive, go on to answer the question with a plan, right? That will increase your sense of competence. Answer it. What if someone is upset? What would you do then? Or what if it didn't work out? Or what if you made the wrong decision? You can follow that through. You can imagine that. You can think through it. You can come up with a plan for if that happens. And then when you have your plan, fold it up, put it in your back pocket, and then get back to doing the thing that you need to be doing. Instead of saying, I don't know, which fuels self-doubt, you can add, but I do know this. One thing I do know builds your self-confidence, and that's going to help you get things done. And instead of making a simple, I'm waiting, say, what are you doing while you're waiting? And it helps you feel like you're being productive. You may not be able to decide right now, but you can do things to help inform the decision you eventually do make. As far as actions go, she recommends breaking down the big, intimidating project into smaller, less threatening tasks. That's a good advice overall for managing things. To inspire yourself to be more productive and self-confident, she recommends motivational books, inspiring music, encouraging quotes, a lot of ways, again, for that positive self-talk to be a part of your experience. She also recommends that you increase the time you spend with the optimistic, self-reliant friends and maybe spend less time with the pessimists and the ones who complain a lot. The negativity in your life doesn't help you see things positively. Also, try to avoid being behind by tackling one thing every day that you've been putting off. You can create a list of them and you can just say, okay, tomorrow, that's the one I'm doing, and visualize that. Take on a task each week that is constructive in and of itself, but that you're usually not comfortable with doing or that you might actually dislike. Pick the thing that you're going to tackle and go for it, not only on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. That way, you build that sense of confidence and that assurance that you can do these things and that they can work out. And if they don't, you can handle the consequences of it too. So that's the Worrier. Now we're going to talk about the Crisis-Maker. Again, the illustrations don't help, but I feel like there's quite a few people out there. I've given this assessment a lot of times with college students, and certainly we have our fair share of perfectionists and dreamers, worriers, and crisis makers are fairly common too. And as you hear about it, you'll start to say, okay, hold on, that does sound a little bit like me. Crisis makers have to get excited about something before they can act on it. And so if it isn't initially exciting to you, then the deadline, eventually, the consequence of not doing it will become the thing that elevates your emotions. Crisis makers can get bored easily. They don't have a lot of tolerance for what they see as being dull or managing tasks methodically. It's like, a calendar and writing things down and, checking lists and stuff like that's not what crisis makers are interested in. Sometimes they can over dramatize situations so that they can be the focus of attention. Like, look at me, look what I'm doing. Sometimes they try to prove themselves or affirm their self-identity by living on that edge. And so, like, if you've ever pulled an all-nighter and then did well on the test and bragged about it, that's the sort of thing. I definitely know that there have been folks who've told me that, they stayed up all night writing a paper and made an A, and that's like, yes, that's how I do it. In fact, that article that I mentioned from 2007 talked about the benefits of procrastination. That part of the students in their study said that there were some good things that came from procrastination, that time crunch. And I had to think, well, I think there's some crisis maker procrastinators in there who see it as good that the deadline drove them. And I'll try to put a link to this video as well as a TED Talk from a web company startup founder where he talks about his approach to procrastination and the idea that if something never has a deadline, he never moves on it. And I'm like, he's a crisis maker, a procrastinator too. So Dr. Zapaden recommends that the creative visualization that crisis makers undergo or that they practice is imagining what it looks like when their schedule and their task list is empty and free to do what they want, right? The sense of control and being able to do what you're interested in as opposed to other things that people ask you to do is sort of the core there, that you want to visualize when you have the freedom to decide. To think about multiple reasons to do an assignment rather than just the deadline or last minute stress being the only motivator. Appreciate that you may not feel interested in things until after you start, right? Like that's the hard thing. It's a similar thing with Dreamer procrastinators. If the idea isn't interesting, they're not going to move on it. Crisis makers are similar. Like if they're not interested in the project or the assignment or the book they're reading or the class they're in, they often put it off. But you have to go looking for that interest and be committed to doing the work. Avoid manufacturing crises by thinking in these extremist terms. Instead, think realistic and specific about times. Like I just have to do 30 pages and I have to do it today or whatever. When it comes to speaking, try to use more thinking words in conversations and cut down on the use on feeling words. If you're talking about your emotions and the way class makes you feel or the assignments or work or whatever it is makes you feel, then you might be building little crises. To avoid dwelling on the negative or passive aspects of student life, don't characterize yourself in conversations as incompetent or helpless or victimized. I mean, this is a place that you chose to be. And yes, there are other people that are in this dynamic, but you can do things. You're not hapless. You're not always running late. It's the kind of thing that you have some control over. When describing school-related events or tasks, don't use dramatic, polarizing language that reinforces your addiction to crises. Try to be more direct and forward and not use hyperbolic language. When discussing a task or something you're working on that you need to do, focus on the positive aspects rather than the negative ones. Like, if nothing else, what are you going to do when you're done, right? You know, there's some good things that come from completing things. And then maybe what you've learned, it may be the grade that you get. There's a lot of good that comes from the stuff that you're doing. As it relates to your actions, try to keep track in writing when these crises happen. So if you pull an all-nighter, keep track of it, whether it's on a calendar or something. If you turn things in last minute, if you find yourself running or rushing to something and you barely get there just in time, if you have these little crises over and over, you'll start to see the patterns, and it might be helpful to figure out what's leading to those. Action planning ahead of time to deal with the big stuff is a great piece of advice for everybody. But if you don't know when you're going to work on something as a crisis maker, you're going to tend to wait until the deadline. You may be late action managers of projects, and so you can work toward working earlier or more consistent in the timeline by having an action plan. You can even give yourself a false deadline that's ahead of the actual deadline if you need one to push yourself. If you're a fun-loving or competitive person, invent a game or a reward that helps motivate you to get through the things you don't want to do. And to offset this need to stimulate yourself through crisis making, get your adrenaline flowing with activities that are more appropriately fun or competitive. Sports, dancing, performing in front of an audience. Like, if you need that sort of, I don't know, rush from something to get going or to be excited or to make meaning in your life, maybe don't do it with college. Maybe do it with something a little bit more appropriate. So that's the crisis maker. I think a lot of us, recognize that stressful life isn't the life we want to lead, but there are some people whose identities are built around that, especially academically in school. Like, you may have always been that person who's turning in things late and doing well. But eventually, if you keep pushing things to the end, something might not get through and get done. All right, let's talk about the procrastination style that I think it's least common, but somebody out there, when they complete the assessments, will get the Defier. And again, illustrations aren't helpful, but I do think it's important to understand it. And I don't think it's your natural inclination, if you are a Defier as a major procrastination style, to listen to this. But I hope you find a way to push through and to learn more, especially if your procrastination is delivering undesired results. In order to appear more cooperative, Defiers often avoid expressing hostility directly. Maybe you want to be polite, maybe you don't want to push, and so instead you communicate your hostility or your defiance indirectly by procrastinating, by putting things off, by avoiding it. Defiers consistently view life in terms of what others do rather in terms of what they genuinely want or need to do. Defiers automatically resent authority figures, and I understand that. I tend to be fairly subversive in my approach. Probably you don't think so, but I promise. But procrastination can be a way of challenging authority, and when you challenge authority, usually there are consequences. So defiers resist doing the constructive kind of self-examination that might enable them to see their problems more clearly. Now, I want to be fair here on this last point. Most of the people who are any of these 6 styles of procrastination don't spend a lot of time examining why. And this may be the first time you've ever had a long conversation or evaluation or reflection on procrastination at all. So I'm not going to call out the defier here. Everybody needs to spend more time looking at their problems more clearly, doing constructive self-examination. But defiers may, because they tend to look at what others do as opposed to what they're doing, maybe a little bit less inclined to self-reflection. And they tend to be a little bit more pessimistic than others, which means you're less likely to do things in a timely, effective manner. You can see where things can go wrong. You can see where things are imbalanced or unfair or whatever. You have a good eye for the angles in the world, and I get that. But when you're thinking, defiers need to creatively visualize what it feels like to not meet other people's expectations, but also not to let other people down or to subvert expectations. Instead, what you're visualizing is what does it feel like for you to be in control? Like, where's the place in your life that you do have control? There's a great idea in the Franklin Covey 7 Habits concepts called the circle of influence and the circle of concern. We spend a lot of time looking at things that we don't really have any direct control over. But if we spend our time investing our energy and effort and attention to the things we can control, and we ask about those things, then we tend to get more sense of accomplishment and authority in our own lives instead of worrying about things we can't do anything about, in particular other people. So defiers, they tend to think about school assignments as requirements of the course, but that's a course you chose. Right? It may be the assignment that the instructor gave, and you may not like the instructor, or you may not like the textbook, or you may not like the class, or you may not like your major or whatever. But those are choices you still made, and you got to think about it that way, as opposed to demands that others are imposing on you. Before reacting to something in anger, try to calm down, take a moment, reason intelligently and practically about it. And instead of complaining about school-related things, generate multiple options for how you can respond to it. I will say that I think over time, in certain situations, my Defier Procrastinator, it was one of my minor styles. It comes out as the initial resistance to an idea because I like ideas so much. But instead of just saying like, oh, no, like that's not a good idea or whatever, I have to think, what are the ways I can answer this? And I can present my disagreement in more acceptable ways. And so multiple options to respond is a great default mode if you find yourself disagreeing with folks. And even though defiance may sometimes be justifiable, you have to choose battles carefully. Make sure you're weighing what's most important and what's worth fighting for. Cultivate that internal nurturing voice. Just like the worrier needs that sort of positive self-talk, you need a voice in your life that minimizes defiance and encourages you to act in your own best interests. Not just say, give in and let them do whatever they want, but what would be best here? Think strategically, not only about what are options available to respond, but really what's the thing that serves your interests best. So when speaking, instead of impulsively using words to blame or attack if you're upset, take time to think about the situation more rationally and find a way to express yourself more constructively. Make sure that the message you want heard is being heard and not being left up to emotions or the language or the approach that you take. When you make a verbal commitment, like I'll give my report in 2 weeks, make sure you keep your word. The way you feel when you don't meet people's expectations only reinforces your resistance and your feeling of pushing back when they call you on it. If you haven't followed through on something that you said you would do, admit it. Don't try to sidestep it, right? I know it doesn't feel good, but facing the fact that you didn't do what you had committed to do is part of growth, and it's part of giving yourself options. But if you fight and push back, then you're creating problems on top of problems. Speak more positively about school and the things that are going on instead of talking about how much you resent them, right? If nothing else, talk about how nice it's going to be done with it. And keep in mind how you speak is just as important as what you say. Hostile tone, antagonistic body language, all that stuff. I've had a lot of people mention in class they can read my face clearly. And I hope that the most of what they're reading is that I'm interested, that I'm curious, or that, but I've had people, notice that I smiled and they were wondering what I thought was funny. Or they may see me make a face where I look like I disagree and they ask, do you disagree? And so, body language and tone also are big speakers, and you don't even have to say words to let people know how you're feeling. So sometimes it helps to keep that in mind. For defiers, when it comes to action, you need to tell people that you're someone you can rely on, that your perspective and that your voice and the ideas that you have are worth hearing. So be someone who is true to their word. And if you say you're going to do something, make sure that you do it. Instead of reacting angrily to something, do your best to act or respond constructively by taking control over it, right? You may not like it. You may not like that you have something to do, but you can control how it gets done. And engage in a group project, work with the team and not against them, regardless of their approach and their personal styles and stuff. You got to work with them. I've seen way too often where groups turn on one person, and it's not because that person can't do the work. It's just about a style or preference. Because students have limited control over obligations, satisfy your need to do things your way by getting involved in pursuits that you can control. Maybe a leadership position is something that you need to get that sense of control, or maybe you need to find ways to personally do things individually. And whether it's setting your calendar or your agenda or your priority list or whatever it might be, you do have some control in life, and you get to identify where that is. That will help you. And as a means of broadening your comply or defy perspective, take a course in assertiveness or conflict resolution. Learn better negotiation skills. The Counseling Center has a lot of helpful resources and individual counseling that can help you approach how to have those interpersonal interactions. So if you're a Defier Procrastinator, know that you're rare in the procrastination world, but there are just as many resources for you to overcome them. Okay, so every time I have given this assessment in class to a group of students, the single largest group were the overdoer procrastinators. I don't know if it's a generational thing. I'm not sure, but the majority of students had overdoer as either a major or minor style every time I have given this assessment. And I'll remind you, I've had this assessment since 2002. So we're going on 20 years of procrastination styles assessment, and it seems to be the case that when we get to college, some folks have difficulty saying no or asking for help. Overdoers tend to take on more work than they can reasonably manage, maybe to compensate for inner feelings of unworthiness, or you want to not lose the opportunity, you want to meet the challenge, or be the kind of person everyone expects you to be. Overdoers sometimes lack self-discipline, especially as it relates to their personal needs and goals, and they tend to assume so many different kinds of responsibilities that they can get confused about priorities, find it hard to focus on individual tasks. If you've got like 6 things that all are due tomorrow, how do you know which one's most important, right? If you've overcommitted yourself, it can be difficult to sort through all the things that you've said yes to. Overdoers also have trouble relaxing and leading an enjoyable, well-balanced life. And, I don't want to act as if the pandemic hasn't made things more difficult. There's maybe less to commit to, but we're over-connected maybe, I don't know. But this sense of balance and enjoyability and relaxing, I think everyone would want that in their life. And overdoers have a natural inclination to overcommit and they can't get to those points. So Dr. Sapaden recommends that they practice creative visualization, where they see themselves doing things they want, things that they need to. They visualize themselves saying politely and working on the skill, no, I can't do that right now. Can I get back to you? I have something else I need to do. One of the things about my big board is that it has the top 3 things that I'm working on, so that if somebody comes in with something new, I can see where is it going to fit in there. And sometimes overdoer procrastinators would benefit from having a sense of what are my priorities and how am I sticking to them. She recommends that you think of the student experience not only as hard work, but also an adventure, something enjoyable. All right. Remind yourself that going to school means you got to make choices. At some point, you can only have so much time and so much of you. And so you do have to choose. There are lots of options, and you're already choosing a lot of things to not do. You're not doing everything that's available. So, remind yourself that you've already made a lot of choices. You can continue to make choices. When you're planning your schedule, do your best to have this appropriate balance between what you want to do personally and what you need to do to meet academic requirements. It's easy for overdoers to focus on the academic stuff and the things that they've already committed to, but not put themselves in their own schedule. Don't think about doing things to please others if it will be at the expense of your own academic success or personal well-being. Think about how you are going to control things instead of simply letting them happen or letting yourself be controlled. I said it lots of times, but if you're the kind of student who lets things happen, things are going to happen. So you've got to decide where you have control and seize that control and make sure you're taking care of yourself and investing in your capacity to generate the kind of results that you're looking for. So rest, eat, exercise, all the things that help you be healthy are all things that are necessary for you to do the things both that you want and that you need to do. For speaking, go ahead and say no when you feel it's appropriate. It's okay, right? You can say, not right now, maybe later, or I'm not going to be able to commit to that. You need to speak about your obligations as based on choices you've made rather than demands that you don't have any control over, right? If someone asks you to do something and you can't because you've already committed to something, you can say, I've already committed to something else. Strengthen your sense of control over your own time and replace those shoulds or supposed to with I will or I want to, right? Just like the perfectionist tends to lead toward these things, being expectations that people have. Both perfectionists and overdoers need to realize that they've made decisions and where they find themselves are a result of their decisions. Also, if you're going to reinforce the fact that you are entitled to relax, you need to be open about that. Don't be defensive about times when you aren't always working. Like, it's okay to take a nap. It's okay to, go to the rec and float the lazy river. It's okay to have an enjoyable life and to be open about it. You don't have to be defensive or like hide the fact that you did something for yourself. Self-care is becoming more and more popular to talk about. Overdoers may not feel like they can talk about it, but it's okay to say, you know what, I'm going to take a break. I need the afternoon just to relax and decompress. It's okay to talk about those things. Also, avoid describing yourself in conversations as powerless or overwhelmed as a student, right? You may not have a lot of choice, or you may have already overcommitted yourself a lot and it may be overwhelming. But say, I have a lot that I've decided to do. There's a lot of things that I have to do given the choices I've made. But those were choices you made. Find the agency in your language when talking about yourself. And when it comes to your actions, try to be more proactive than reactive, right? Proactivity means that you see the opportunity to make a decision, even in the moments of high stress or a little time, to make a decision based on your priorities, your values, your principles. Not just responding in the moment based on the stress or the circumstance. You have the opportunity to be proactive. Develop a habit of reviewing your plans every day to determine the best way of getting the things done, right? Check in with your calendar. Everybody should check in with your calendars every morning to say what's going on today, what's going on this week, what's coming up the next week. But overdoers really need to keep track of their plans and check in with them frequently. Be sure to incorporate social and personal activities into your daily schedule. Like, if it's a priority, if it's important to you, it should be on your calendar. And recharge your energy and interest in student life by connecting with the things you want to do that you enjoy. And learn that you don't have to do everything yourself by asking for help, right? If you see that there's a need, even if you don't feel like it, just say, hey, would you like to do this with me, right? Include other people and let other people help you. Form study groups, engage in group projects where you can learn and work more effectively. Don't isolate yourself and make it seem like you're the only person who's in college and you have to do everything all the time. So that's the Overdoer Procrastinator. Let's check in with our second checkpoint, steps in beating procrastination. First, it's important to move from denial or maybe ignorance to awareness by asking, who am I? What do I want to do? What do I want? And you can learn more about yourself. Hopefully these assessments and this workshop in this video have helped you learn more and become more aware of your procrastination styles. But the next step is moving from awareness to commitment. Accept responsibility for your procrastination. These are your choices. And reverse your buts, then add ands. And what Dr. Sapeden means by this is, you could say, I really want to do something. I really want to finish this chapter. Or I really want to study for this test, or I really want to, write this paper. But I have so many other things I'm doing. What she means is you say, I have so many other things I'm doing, but I really need to read this chapter. And this is how I'm going to do it. Like, change the way that you talk about it and commit to the action. But moving from commitment to action, it's normally where people fall off track, right? It's normal, right? It's something we don't do naturally or haven't done a lot of. It's easy to get off track, but you can get back on track, right? Just because things don't work out doesn't mean that you beat yourself over it and say, well, I'm never going to be good at this, right? Having that open mindset as opposed to fixed mindset when it comes to trying to improve on your procrastination is important as you're moving from commitment to action. And you need to reward yourself for progress, right? This is work. And in the normal world, when you work, you get paid. So pay yourself. Now, you may not be able to financially reward yourself, but you can find the things that you enjoy and use them as your payment for the work that you're doing to improve on procrastination or to be a college student or whatever it is. So these are the important steps in beating procrastination, moving from denial or ignorance to awareness, awareness to commitment, and then commitment to action. In general, if you're going to beat procrastination, the way to do it is by recognizing what needs to be done well, what needs to just be done, and what's not worth doing at all, right? If those categories help you, you can say, this is a thing I need to do well. Put it in that category. If it just needs to get done, then put it in that middle category. And if it doesn't need to do it all, then forget about it. Move on to the things that need to be done and done well. Try to give yourself 10% more time for the unexpected. Do you even know how many pages you read in a minute? Right? How do you know how long it's going to take you to study for 3 weeks of class before you have a test, right? You need to account for these things and give yourself more time than you expect because things are going to happen. Break the big tasks into smaller tasks. Get in the habit of doing things right away. Like, I have a son, he's 12 in 2021, and he, doesn't put things up right away. And he gets into the habit of just kind of like letting things lie. And then when we're like, hey, we need to get ready for bed, we need to clean up, it's a big task now because he didn't do the little things along the way. David Allen says that if you can get it done in 2 minutes, do it right then in 2 minutes if you want to get things done. Prioritize. Again, whether it needs to be done well, just get done, or not at all, figure out what priority structure works for you and take care of yourself. 7 Habits talks about sharpening the saw, investing in your capacity to generate the results that you want. Like, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're the only you have. So be sure to take care of yourself physically, emotionally, do everything you can to invest in your capacity to meet these expectations. So one of the things that Dr. Sapeden said at the end of her talk stuck with me the whole time. We have a saying in the Western world that time is money. Right? Time is money. Like, everyone's got an hourly rate. You're wasting my time. And that it's just a lie. It's not true. Time is not money, she said. Time is life. It is precious. It is powerful, and it is perishable, right? Money, the value of it goes up and down. And there are times when no matter how much money you have, you can't get done what you need to get done. And you can always find more money, whether through legitimate means or not. So on this checkout, as we're wrapping up, I would encourage you to take the perspective that time is not money. It's your life. And if you waste it, you're not going to get it back. But if you do something with it that you want, that can be precious and that can be powerful. There are some resources on campus to help with procrastination. Academic coaches in the Learning Center, 164 Drain Hall. There's a telephone number and their web address. I encourage you to connect with them. Life coaches in student success and retention, 227 Drain Hall, 806-742-7774. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. And the psychologists and counselors in the Student Counseling Center. That's 201, the Student Wellness Center. Again, their contact information there. If you need help with procrastination, if you'd like to learn more about any of these strategies, these folks are here to do that for you. Certainly, I'd be happy to talk with you if you've got questions. If you want to check out the book from the library here in my office, certainly can do that for you as well. But we would love to hear from you. And so if there's anything we can do to help, be sure to reach out to us. Our contact information, of course, is in the description for this video. And this has been Procrastination Styles. Hope you enjoyed this checkup. Be sure to check out our other videos. And if you have any questions whatsoever about being pre-health, be sure to contact your pre-health advisor today. All right, take care.